Solo: A Star Wars Story is the newest film in the Star Wars franchise, and this movie is directed by Ron Howard. In this film stars Alden Ehrenreich as a young Han Solo as he begins his journey as being one of the most well-known and cunning smugglers in the entire galaxy. During his journey, with the aid of a small group of criminals consisting of Chewbacca and Lando Calrissian and others, they will try to acquire a rare resource that could potentially pay for Han's freedom. When they announced that they were going to make this film, and this is the first Star Wars movie that's happened to myself, but I was disappointed that they were making this movie. Han Solo is my favorite Star Wars character of all time. Period. But the idea of seeing a film that focuses on a younger version of this character and how he became to be the scoundrel that we all know and love sounded pretty uninteresting to me. Han Solo, I'm the captain of the Millennium Falcon. That's really all I need to know about him as far as his backstory goes. Also, not to mention the fact that I was less than impressed with Rogue One. But even with that film, I was not against it in regards to its premise. In fact, I thought it was a great idea. However, the execution I felt differently about. And ever since they announced that this movie was being made, everything that I have seen, including just the foundation of its title, I was pretty lukewarm about, no pun intended. Not to mention the calamity that ensued behind the scenes. So my reaction before and after seeing this movie remains the same. 1, why do we need this movie? And 2, who cares? When Alden Ehrenreich decided to portray Han Solo, he had a rather tough job ahead of him. Harrison Ford's portrayal of that character is one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known performance in the entire franchise. So the idea of him taking on this monumental task is commendable just from the get-go. And thankfully, he does a totally fine job. He doesn't ruin the legacy of the character. He's completely serviceable. At best, he's this charismatic and wisecracking character, and at worst, I had to remind myself that he was playing Han Solo a number of times throughout this film. Lando Calrissian is portrayed by Donald Glover, a multi-talented actor and someone who's probably one of the most versatile performers in the entertainment industry. And I thought he did a really good job as Lando. He's smooth, he's arrogant, and he's charming. I will say, I felt he was more doing an impression of Billy Dee Williams, whereas Alden Ehrenreich was making his performance a bit more of his own. But by far, the best element of this film, and quite literally the biggest standout of this movie, was Chewbacca. He stole every single scene that he was in. This film arguably gives him the most to do out of all of those in the Star Wars franchise, and we get to see an uncaged and younger version of Chewbacca who really lets loose in a couple of incredibly satisfying moments. But unfortunately, that brings me to one of my biggest issues that I have with this film, is that if you're not one of those three characters who are these incredibly significant characters in the Star Wars franchise, you're honestly pretty forgettable. Almost every secondary character in this film I found to be completely unremarkable. The only character who I thought really stood out was that of L3, who is really very different and interesting and someone that I was looking forward to seeing more of. But I found almost every other character that isn't Chewbacca, Lando, or Han Solo to just be either a plot device or just forgettable. But by far the biggest complaint that I have with this movie is just the constant barrage of Easter eggs that are thrown at the audience. Many times throughout the duration of this film, I am surprised that the actors just didn't stop, look at the camera, and wink because they are just so on the nose. I feel like this film is almost a reverse version of Mad Libs, to where you have this criteria that a lot of people that go to see this movie are expecting to see. How did he get his blaster? How did he meet Chewbacca? How did he win the Millennium Falcon? How did he complete the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs? And I feel like you have all of those elements that are kind of thrown into this movie, and then the context is almost an afterthought. It's just, we have to make sure that we explain A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. But a lot of these moments are just so egregious and so in your face that I'm surprised that my eyes just didn't pop out of my head because I was rolling them so hard. And I think the inclusion of those details in these fan service moments do do more to hinder the film instead of help it. So often the film has to stop in its tracks and explain this and explain that, which was one of the biggest things I was hoping that this movie wouldn't do. I think the best case scenario for this film and when it could have succeeded the most is if it wasn't a Han Solo origin movie, if it was just a fun adventure with Han and Chewie doing some smuggling like we expect them to be doing. If they insist on making a young Han Solo movie, I think that's how it should have been done. I don't need to see how he gets his blaster. I don't need to see why he has the dice. I just don't need it. Or better yet, you know where this movie could have felt right at home is in the form of a comic book. This would have been a perfectly enjoyable comic or a perfectly enjoyable novel to read, because those comics or those novels don't contain critical information that you must know before you go see the next Star Wars film. They just contain these little nuggets of information that Star Wars nerds like me perhaps might like to know. And that's honestly the perfect way to describe this movie. I could have gone my entire life without knowing any of the information that I do, but after seeing this movie, I was just kind of like, okay, neat. Instead, I would much rather see a Star Wars anthology film that focuses on new characters and new adventures that we don't know the outcome of. And maybe on these adventures along the way, they meet people that we know and love, but at the core of the story, it's new characters. Because so far with these anthology films, we may be getting new characters, but for the most part, they are completely uninteresting and forgettable. Overall, Solo is a completely serviceable Star Wars film about one of the most beloved characters in pop culture. I think the exclusion of Lord and Miller's original version could have potentially watered down the final product into something that I did not need to see and made me wonder why it was made in the first place. With this film, they do set up the potential for future films with this version of Han Solo, and honestly, I would much rather see those films than this movie, especially if they insist on making these anthology films about characters and events that we already know the outcome of. Sure, why not? Because my hope is with that sequel that the film won't feel the need to stop every 10 minutes and remind us Star Wars fans that, hey, you like Star Wars, don't you? I honestly don't really feel the need to rewatch this movie to solidify my feelings on it like I did with The Last Jedi, so here is my ranking of these Star Wars films. Feel free to disagree with me. That's totally fine. So did you guys see Solo, A Star Wars Story? What did you think about it? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video. And if you did, you can click on the link down below and subscribe to my channel to see more movie reviews and movie-related things. Again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.